Hello my dear friends, how is it going? I'm Mari Theriger, and today I'm going to talk about the conversion of Iceland to Christianity over 1,000 years ago, which was a religious phenomenon that completely changed the face of Iceland and its people, as well as the mentalities of Icelanders and their perception towards the world that surrounded them. Now, this is a subject I have touched a little bit a couple of times before, mainly due to the massive and important Icelandic literary works that give us a glimpse into Old Norse mythology. However, such works with, of course, a heavy Christian religious influence and much of the content dealing with pagan peoples of Nordic countries was through the accounts of the lives of saints and not a direct contact with the pagans themselves, the actual pagans, and so on and so forth. My aim here isn't to once again point out the heavy Christian religious influences on Norse mythology, and most of them from an Icelandic religious perspective and not a continental Scandinavian one, but rather to once again understand or try to understand the cultural and religious impact upon the history of Iceland and by consequence on Norse myths and belief systems themselves, so we can better try to perceive or distinguish the actual pagan content, which unfortunately it's very difficult because not only the cultural and religious aspects blend so well, but the phenomenon of Catholicism wasn't just Christianity blending with paganism, but pagans themselves willingly incorporating several concepts of Catholicism, especially taking into account the strong animistic elements of both pagan beliefs and early Catholicism itself, which helped people to create a very concise religious syncretism. Let us begin by mentioning the most important literary work that tells us precisely about the conversion of Iceland. It was in the year 1200 that the saga called Kristni Saga, Saga of Christianity, or the Book of Christianity, was composed in Iceland, which narrates the episodes of the turbulent period of conversion, and Christianity was then the approved religion and made official by the Icelandic National Assembly in the year 999, a very auspicious year. And from then on, Iceland officially became a Christian nation after long decades of religious turmoil. It is a very particular or peculiar text as a mixture between the style used to write contemporary Icelandic sagas with the European model of hagiographic literature, so the kind of literature that deals with the biographies of saints, right? It is preserved in a medieval manuscript from the early 1300s, the Hoxbók, of which a part is unfortunately missing today, but replaced later on in the 17th century, written by Jon Herderson. Some have suggested that it was originally composed in the 12th century, since the genealogies it cites stop there, but many other studies seem to not agree with that date. It is possible that it was not actually composed in a specific year, but rather assembled by a compiler who took parts from previous sources, as with the famous poetic Edda, for instance. But the vast majority of the reports date back in this saga, in their current form, of course, to the beginning of the middle of the 13th century. So Kristni Saga is a work you can certainly read and have a better perception of what I'm talking about here. But I don't want to take up much of your time with these, details, and I have other videos that talk a little bit about the conversion of Iceland, which is a topic that should always be talked about when dealing with sources on Norse mythology, of course. But now I'll summarize this as best as I can, or as best as possible. However, we must bear in mind that we are dealing with a medieval text whose creation served exclusively to promote, disseminate, and defend a religious idea, Christianity. Therefore, we should not take this text as a historiographical document as if it were a detailed account of events that really happened as they were written. Something I've already more or less said in here before, precisely through another example, the issue of St. Patrick, for instance, that the vast majority of what we know about his life comes from accounts after his death, long after his death, where St. Patrick serves as a key figure for promotion and defense of Catholicism. And then there is a great mixture of themes that didn't really happen, nor did the real St. Patrick do any of that. Now, the first missionary mentioned is Thorvaldur Þórðarson, the traveler who, having converted in Saxony, brought with him to Iceland a bishop, Frederick, in 981 of the Common Era, for whom he acted as an interpreter in the evangelization he tried to carry out in the country, in Iceland. He was a little bit of a fanatic, to say the least, and initially converted only a few people because he was insufferable, a bit of a prick, actually. Well, in fact, he made a mistake that Irish missionaries did not do back in Ireland, which is to try to convert in hostile ways. And that is why people introduced to the new faith do not like that type of approach. They don't like that very much and rejected it, understandably. So the few converts initially were mainly in the north of Iceland, but in later years he managed to convert more people from other parts of the country, many of whom refused to pay taxes in pagan temples. Tensions arose, and in the assembly, when the bishop was invited to preach, a pagan poet composed a verse accusing the bishop and Thorvaldur of screwing each other. And for the insult, Thorvaldur killed 2 men. The pagans obviously sought revenge, and the 2 Christians fled to Norway, doubtless to resume their screwing of one another elsewhere. Among Thorvaldur's converts was a lord from the north, Thorvardur, who built a church, and the pagans wanted to burn it, but when they approached, they saw the mirage of the burning church and gave up. And the church, however, was intact, so they tried a second time and struggled to get the fire going. They were hit by arrows that came absolutely out of nowhere, and that was enough to convince them to give up and flee. And so the church remained unscathed. This was 16 years before the conversion, or so it says in the saga, in 984. So here we can see that touch, not at all subtle, of the hagiographic literature style. In the time of King Haraldur Kormarsson, Bluetooth, King of the Danes, the Bishop of Bremen, Olbert, came to Denmark and settled in Horthus, in Jutland. He had with him a chaplain named Thangbrandur, son of Wilbold, Count of Bremen. Sounds fancy. Anyway, Thangbrandur converted the future Norwegian king Olafur Tryggvason, being baptized in Ireland, and there Thangbrandur got himself a maiden. In Denmark, a local lord wanted her very much, but Thangbrandur refused, and so the 2 fought, and Thangbrandur killed him. He therefore fled Denmark and took refuge with King Olafur, in Norway, who reportedly made him a priest and kept him at his court. An Icelander named Stefanir Thorgilsson was the grandson of Eilifur, son of Elgi Bjolla, of Kellarn. He was in the court of the king, who ordered him to take the word of God to Iceland. So Icelanders reacted badly at this, especially his family, but he still toured the country proclaiming Christianity with great conviction. Given the situation, the assembly passed a law demanding that Christian relatives be denounced, and Stefanir was accused of Christianity, so he returned to Norway without accomplishing anything. Yes, meanwhile, King Olafur discovered that Father Thangbrandur was a cunning man. Apparently he was stealing, so he proposed to him to make peace and make amends for the murder, to go and Christianize Iceland. He did so and arrived in Iceland in the following summer in the southeast. Well, details. Once word spread that he was a Christian, people began to avoid him except the district lord Hallur of Sida, who became curious. So Thangbrandur sang the mass in Latin, as was customary. Hallur was curious and asked questions, seeing the incense, the ringing of the bells, the clothes, and the entire ceremony. Hallur and his family were very interested with the new religion and were impressed with it and interested in it. And on the Saturday before Easter, Hallur was baptized with his family in Thotto River. That summer, they went to Parliament, the Assembly. The saga mentions that they passed through Kyrkjubæjar, now Kyrkjubæjarklaustur, where Surtur Ásbjörnsson, grandson of Ketil the Stupid, that's what the saga says, the Christian settler who lived and founded Kyrkjubæjar. And he notes that everyone in the family was baptized, and on their way to the assembly at Thingvellir, Thangbrandur, he converted more people and baptized more people, many more people. The same was repeated in the assembly and again during the trips he made to the north. Well, the pagans did not sit idly by and began to compose insulting verses against him. And well, that's what you do in Iceland. No riots, no breaking and burning property. You just rap your way until people are absolutely pissed. Now, in fact, on a trip to the west of Iceland, Thangbrandur was challenged to a duel by a rather angry pagan. So, well, you really had to be especially pissed off to actually challenge someone to a duel. And well, Thangbrandur agreed. Well, why not? He was a Christian. And the furious pagan claimed that he could walk on hot coals and throw himself on his dagger without suffering any harm, and he challenged the priest to do the exact same thing. Thangbrandur obviously blessed the embers and made a cross on the dagger. The furious pagan's feet were, obviously, burned when he stepped over the fire, and, well, not happy about it, when he fell on the dagger, it pierced him and he was killed. As he was a very hot-headed person, this pleased many good people, even if they were pagans, or so the saga says. Once again, that not-so-subtle touch of the fantasy and miraculous life of saints. So seeing this, pagans were a little bit more inclined to be converted. However, after this and so much magical work and trouble, the priest left Iceland and told the king that there was no hope of converting the Icelanders. Out of spite, the king was furious and ordered the arrest of some Icelanders who were at his court. Two influential Icelanders, Hjalti and Gissur, negotiated with the king. He released the hostages, and some Icelanders were appointed with the task of preaching Christianity. So they were baptized and released and returned to Iceland to preach the religion. When the assembly met at Thingvellir that summer, the number of Christians had already grown considerably and refused to submit to pagan laws. The missionaries, Hjalti and Gissur, in a dramatic cloud of incense, gave their speeches, and very eloquent and convincing preaching, according to the saga, of course, and no one dared to go against them due to their influence. However, an obstacle had been reached because neither group, pagans or Christians, agreed to submit to the other's laws. At the same time, a messenger arrived from Holfus, reporting that an eruption had begun. The pagans said, oh, well, it was no wonder the gods were angry, but the lord from Western Iceland, Snorri Godi, one of the protagonists of the Evangelization Saga, famously asked, why are the gods angry when the lava that flows is now rock beneath our feet? Bro. Well, the two factions, pagans and Christians, separated, and each intended to approve and declaim their own laws. The Christians elected Hallur as their representative and tasked him with enunciating their laws. However, the jurist, the highest legal position at the time, as well as a pagan priest, Thorgeir Ljósvetningagoddir, received a large sum of silver from Hallur in exchange for the task of enunciating laws for Christians as well. Evidently, Hallur didn't think he was up to the task. Thorgeir, therefore, had a problem to solve, so he decided to meditate that night on that problem. And meanwhile, the pagans decided it would be a good idea to sacrifice 2 people from each of the 4 quadrants of the country, begging the gods not to force them to become Christians. The Christians, however, they decided to do the exact same thing, but to show their superiority, offering to their Lord Jesus Christ not their worst man as the pagans did, but their best man, so that they could live righteously and without sin. I mean, who gives a shit? You are killing people anyway. The next day, the jurist Thorgeir woke up and gathered everyone together, announcing his verdict. He suggested that it was good that they only had one law that was the same for everyone, because breaking the law meant breaking the peace. I mean, no shit, Sherlock. You meditated all night just to come up with this. It was the year 1000 according to the calendar at the time, but 999 according to the current one, and all Icelanders were baptized. For some years, they retained the ability to consume horse meat and kill unwanted newborns, as well as the ability to secretly sacrifice to the gods. And after a few years, perhaps no more than 20, these activities were abolished. Within a few decades, Christianity took root and became the basis of Icelandic culture. During the early years, there were foreign bishops in Iceland. In the mid-11th century, a man named Gissur the White, a wealthy southern lord, built an estate at Skáholt and sent his son, Isleifur, to study in Germany, and was finally consecrated bishop at the age of 50 in the time of Pope Leo IX. Isleifur was bishop of Iceland for 24 years, lived on the family estate, Skáholt, and ordained several priests, including Jon Högmannarsson, who in turn would become bishop of the new diocese founded in the north at Hólar in 1156. Isleifur's son Gissur became a bishop in turn and was responsible for introducing the tax known as tithe. A tenth of the taxes were donated to the church. It was he who gave up a quarter of the diocese to establish one in the north, and who chose the family estate, again Skáholt, as the seat of the diocese, which remained Iceland's most important political and cultural center until the rise of Reykjavik in the late 18th century. With Gissur, peace reigned in the country, in Iceland. Gissur's successor, Klængur, erected a splendid cathedral in 1158. The church was built with 2 ships loaded with timber cut from Norway and cost the equivalent of 1,600 cows, and that's a lot of cows for the time. But the church was razed to the ground in 1309 after being struck by lightning. So yeah, perhaps the god Thor, returning from Iceland for vacation, and came across this and was like, the fuck with this, and smush. It is from here that the stories told in the sagas of the great bishops began, stories full of struggles, miracles, and adventures. Well, all this to give you a quick idea of the type of literature of the time and all these fantastic and miraculous events, which is a literature that greatly influenced many politicians, important religious figures in medieval Iceland, people with a lot of social, economic, and political influence and power, like Snorri Sturluson, the author of the Prose Edda, the literary work that gives us the most extensive information about Norse mythology from an Icelandic Christian perspective, from a politician whose interest was to promote Christianity even further, trying to demonstrate that their pagan ancestors were already knowledgeable about Christian morals and conduct and values. Of course, this type of religious literary environment and all these conversion sagas influenced many other poets as well. Therefore, when we talk about Snorri Sturluson, we are not only talking about a Christian with great power and political influence, but we are also talking about a general mentality of the time when not only was Christianity already the official religion of Iceland for more than 200 years in Snorri's time, but also Snorri and his compatriots were highly influenced by the adventures, fantasies, and miracles of the sagas that involved the theme of conversion and were made precisely to promote and defend religion. So this historical aspect of Iceland is the root of the religious influence of Snorri and other authors whose prose and poetry on Norse mythology are meant to promote Christianity. And I do hope this was useful somehow. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time and support and your patience. As always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Until we meet again, my dear friends. Pretending to read a book just to look a little bit more sharp and intellectual while you watch for a few seconds the end screen. You just have to bear it a little bit. I mean, who else reaches this far? Only my mother and probably people who completely forgot that this video was running, and so now I'm just talking and they are doing something else. Hopefully something a little bit more, you know, I don't mind at all. Keep doing what you are doing. I'm just sitting here reading, pretending to read a book. Very interesting book indeed. What the hell am I reading? Oh, right.